That's why I say it keeps coming back to that fundamental question, because do we tolerate that? Do we tolerate the idea that there's suffering that exists today that shouldn't? And I think that gets back to the conservative progressive view of it. And it doesn't mean that one of them is right or wrong, but some people look at
Mhm.
that and say, unfortunately, we have to tolerate it because that's how we get to the greater good. And there's other people that say, I'll never tolerate it. It's never okay to me. And I think at their core, they could both be well-intentioned, loving, beautiful things. They are just, and maybe this is where you were before. It's that fundamental what you're born with outlook on life and where it takes you. What's the solution then? I guess becomes the question, right? Like, is there a solution that allows this to account for all those issues and still make it work in some way?
Well, there is, since we've been so philosophical in this conversation, I'm just going to, and this is my pessimistic view, there is no political solution. There is a constant tension, a constant series of trade offs. That doesn't mean that we can't, from um, the American solution, if we want to call it that, and I'm uncomfortable with the word solution, but I'll call it,
Sure.
we'll use that for the time being. The American solution that the founders bequeathed us is pluralism, right? Democracy is not satisfactory. In fact, it is at best the majority kind of gets what they want, and the minority isn't murdered, right? Or at least gets to get on with their life and they're not happy at all, but they're not in danger and their rights are respected. And that is the democratic system. That is, and the bigger our country gets, the more complex. What, 330 million of us. We're never going to agree on everything. Good grief, even if we get all the conservatives and progressives to agree, you can't even get all the conservatives to agree, let
Mhm.
alone the left and the right singing kumbaya around the campfire. There have been, though, waxing and waning times of where our nation had more of a consensus. Heck, there was, Civil War, you could certainly argue it was even more divisive than it was today. And I do think sometimes we can get a little tunnel vision. After the election of 1800, I believe at various eras in the Gilded Age, you can go back and read the political battles they were having then, and it's like, wow, we actually don't have it so bad at the moment. But I think that again, conservative here, big fan of the founding fathers. I do think that is within reason. The political solution to this is pluralism. It's that sort of messy business of constantly arguing back and forth and recognizing that we have made progress. We're working toward a more perfect union while looking outside of all of that for our deeper purpose in life.
Mm, mm. Yeah, and it makes me wonder, is there any room in that? I like that explanation. I think it's a super reasonable. Not everybody might agree with it. They might see the world differently, but I think there's an understanding to it. The question becomes like, is there room anywhere in there for hate? I'll say hate in the group. I would assume there's never really room for hate, although you let me know your take on that. But the passion that comes with it, right? Because almost what you're explaining is maybe the best state is a recognition that, hey, this works best when we see the world differently and we figure
Mm-hmm.
out a way to kind of blend it to get to the best outcome. At some point, it would seem there'd be a recognition to say, okay, then we should argue, we should debate, but it should never get to a level of vitriol and anger that maybe it gets to today or has gotten through throughout history. Like, is that okay? Is that hatred? Is that probably fear? A lot of it it's rooted in. Does it still work if that exists, or should the goal be to eliminate that?
Yeah, and that's a good question. I don't think we'll ever eliminate hate, and I don't know that hate ever is always inappropriate. And here I am pulling from scripture again. It says, "Let not the sun go down on your anger, or hate and sin not." And it's almost a recognition that hatred is a human emotion that you can't just choose not to. Like sometimes that's going to happen, but what do you do with it? And how do you dwell on it? Do you ruminate over it? And there are genuine times where, let's just face it, people behave in terrible ways, and maybe hatred is the most appropriate emotion to extend toward them. That being said, I think perhaps maybe more to the heart of what you're talking about, though, vitriol is not conducive to good government. And we have certainly seen, well, we have seen on both sides of the aisle, even if maybe someone might be able to reasonably argue that one party is worse than the other, okay, whatever, a complete dearth of leadership.
Mm.
And we are lacking statesmen. And I think that has opened the floodgates, not to mention the growth of social media, has opened this floodgate to a sort of vitriolic enmity between multiple sides in the United States. And sometimes the great irony is that when you're able to successfully put these two sides together, they're like, oh, we actually don't disagree as much as we thought we did. But we've gotten to the point we've so segregated within the United States, and there is that great separation, right? Where there's the red states are getting redder, the blue states are getting bluer. And it's gotten to the point that we no longer see the other as American. And that's a problem. That sort of vitriol is not okay or conducive to a healthy functioning government. We're always going to be at odds with each other, but we could be at odds with each other saying you're wrong, but heck, if we're going to war, you're just as much an American as I am. Or heck, if we're in peace, you're just as much an American as I am. You just happen to be a wrong American. And I think there is a certain balancing there when I was talking about plurality, for instance. I'm a huge fan of federalism. There's a lot of things the states of California and Massachusetts do that here in, red state Oklahoma, I think is nuts. But also, maybe it's okay that they do it that way. What business is that of mine? Why? And I think that's part of the problem is we've nationalized every freaking thing, that all power gets invested in the central government to the point that we all have to swing red or blue, even though it doesn't change that much in our minds. We all have to dictate everything from a red or blue stance. And I don't mean to make that answer messier than it needs to be. I guess, there's a needfulness to kind of allow for everybody to fly their freak flags, while at the same time, maybe flying less of them and maybe flying them less flamboyantly and less in the other person's eyes. So I don't know if that answers your question or not.
I mean, it does answer it. There's always another level, right? And that's the beauty of this, is you could always dig deeper, a step, and because it begs the question still, why like what you just articulated beautifully around the sentiment of, at the end of the day, we're still Americans. You hear that often, but we don't see it nearly enough. And maybe there's reasons for that, right? Maybe there's the dearth of leadership. Maybe it's the media and the way that they're covering it, but it at least seems to be true. It seems that we can't overcome that. It seems that we can't recognize that the approach we're taking at its worst, right, when the vitriol is high, that's actually likely causing more of a problem than it's solving anything that we're actually afraid of.